Welcome to the TufFish. I am so excited to bring to you Jacob Hess. Jacob, I am so glad you are here.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you are. So I would love for you to start out by sharing with our listeners and our viewers from a YouTube standpoint, but
hmm
um, tell a little bit about your background and what helped to lead you to want to write.
Yeah. Um, I actually wasn't a big reader growing up, and I didn't really start writing until after college. Writing, like, besides doing homework and things like that, because in college I really started to read things that really touched my passions and really excited me. And before that, books seemed to be just like homework, something that I had to do. So when I started reading those kind of books, and they were really revolved around what I was studying in ministry. And because I did my undergrad in worship ministry, then I got my Master's of Divinity. And so when I started reading these books, it really started to excite me, and it really touched back to growing up when because I was really, I really loved stories growing up. But that was usually in just, I would just encounter those stories not through books but through like movies, TV, like just making things up on my own. And so as I was reading, it kind of touched those passions that I had growing up, and I decided that I wanted to start telling a story that really involved some of the things that I believe and that I wrestle with and that I want to see, and show it through story. And I really think stories they're really powerful. It's narratives that can capture our imaginations, and it's really our imaginations that guide our actions and really form who we become. And so I wanted to write a story that really that is talks about these deep things, that helps to capture people's imaginations towards the good, and does it in a fun way, so that's why I wanted to start writing a story. And so I started doing that back in 2014 is when I started this project that I just released last year. So I've been working on it for quite a while. A lot of rewrites, a lot of, well, I'm just going to scrap that whole draft because I didn't really know what I was doing, and it took a while to really figure it out.
Totally get that. And you said
Mhm.
a few things I wanted to touch on, one of
Yeah.
which was that writing felt what you didn't necessarily use this word, but the word came to me as cathartic. When you're
hmm
writing and it's helping you process, or it's helping you to look at change your perspective and look at something
hmm
differently. It sounds like the writing you were doing was in serving in that way. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Like, even in my studies in school, writing was a part of my, even my relationship with God. Like, I would write these things that I'm thinking about and dwelling on, and through writing I could come to a greater understanding and even a deeper relationship, I think, with God and with others.
That's
Um,
really
yeah.
cool. That is really, really cool. So you mentioned that also that when you were in school
hmm
and the whole reading, and I totally get it, because I recollect so many times having a book that I had to read
Right.
versus a book that I wanted to read. So was there a particular book that really kind of shifted things for you, that you said, this is really cool. This is something it was almost kind of freeing in a way.
I can't think of a particular book. There has been books that have been really impactful, like Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen is one in particular, um, that have been impactful. But I think it was just being in that university setting, studying things with others that they cared about and that I also cared about, was just a great atmosphere to be in. And I think reading books has been a way to return to that kind of world for me.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome.
hmm
So you mentioned also that you started this book that released late
hmm
last year, um, back in 2014. So
Right.
that's a process.
Yeah.
That's dedication. That's a process. That's some real love going into it. Can you talk about what some of that has felt like?
Yeah. I mean, so I wasn't working just straight through. There was some times where I took a break and was like, this isn't going anywhere. Like, I don't like what I'm writing. And so I just took like a break for like a year, but it has been fairly consistent since 2014. So it was I had this idea in my mind of what I wanted to write from the beginning. And it's been a continual process of figuring out what that is and how to best bring people into that story. And so it was a long process. What really helped me was, have you ever heard of the story grid?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But talk about it so that if our listeners aren't familiar with it.
Okay. Yeah. So the story grid is come up with by an editor named Sean Coyne. He's been in the editing world for like 30 some years, and he wrote this book that helps writers edit their own stories. And so I read his book, Story Grid, and it really helped me get a new perspective on what I was writing, because I knew it just wasn't adding up the way that I wanted to. I knew the characters weren't as coming alive as much as I wanted to. The story was kind of lagging in some spots. And so he helped me to kind of analyze that, have a different lens on the story so that I could really tell the story that I wanted to tell in a way that was imaginative and more captivating. So that's really, yeah, what
I'm
was the
sorry.
turn for me.
Yeah, I was. So could you talk a little bit more about, so for instance, when you were going back through editing your
Mhm.
book, how did that, could you talk a little bit about how you kind of worked through the dynamic of weaving in this approach while making your
Yeah.
own changes?
Yeah, so I had a draft at that point that was okay but not great. And so what I did was I kind of just followed his guidelines. I made a foolscap, which is like your story on one page. I broke it down into, my 15 most important scenes. And in the story grid, he really focuses on stories through specific genres. So I studied my genre, got an
Good.
idea of what are those kind of main characters, main scenes that need to be in the story to actually fit that genre. And it's not like you're writing just genre literature. It's like creating a framework that helps you be more creative. Because I mean, if you can just do anything, then it can be a little debilitating, and you might do things that just aren't, great for the story you're trying to tell. So it was helpful to kind of build that fence around what I was doing. I mean, this is over 100,000 words, like, or yeah. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome though.
So it's a lot to try to like rile in and create something that's actually meaningful. So that was helpful in that I got the big picture, and then I went scene by scene and just kind of analyzed it scene by scene, using kind of some of his different frameworks. He breaks scenes down into inciting incident, complications that arise for your characters, a crisis where they need to make a decision, a climax, and then a resolution. So every scene has these different elements. And so I was kind of just analyzing every scene on a more so you get the big picture and then you get the scene by scene work, which is kind of two different ways to think about it. So I did both of those things. And then I actually worked with one of his editors as well, and he helped me to kind of get a better grasp for the genre in particular, which I was writing an action kind of rebellion story. And so he kind of helped me get a better grasp on the genre and to fill in some gaps that I had. And then, I mean, after that, I felt like it was a pretty strong draft. So that's when I decided to move towards publishing.
That's awesome. That is so cool, Jacob. So now I know part of your story is well, not part. The story is set in with the science fiction element to it.
Right.
It has sci-fi
Yes.
a part of it. So there's elements of world building that you had to do to create, like you said, there were boundaries that you're bumping into to help your characters kind of have tension and conflict going on.
Yeah.
But how did you think through some of the world building in order to make this place feel real?
The world building for me wasn't the difficult part, like because I've been, I love Star Wars, and I love Lord of the Rings, and really this book is kind of like a Lord of the Rings and Star Wars meeting,
That's awesome.
So yeah, so I had like a lot of things in my mind that I wanted for the world already when I started writing. So that wasn't the most difficult part. The difficult part was like creating a story that's worth following in the midst of this world that I had in my mind.
Totally get that.
Yeah.
Totally get that. How did you feel? So when you're writing a book, and
Hmm.
you're in that writer author mode, it feels one way. But then when you have to put your own editor hat on, even before you give it to another editor like you did,
Right.
but you've put your own hat on, how did you help to make that shift so that you felt comfortable making big changes?
Hmm.
Sometimes it might be a word, sometimes it might have been killing off a character, sometimes it might have been, I love this scene, but is this scene really working here,
Right.
or is it just not doing anything? How did that feel to you to go through that?
Yeah, I mean, when I was there were some points at which I got really upset because I would, be listening to these, the story grid methodology and reading the book, and then I would find that my story isn't working because of these different problems. And I would just kind of get frustrated because, that after working on it for so many years, and just having to delete a bunch of stuff isn't, doesn't feel great.
No.
But yeah, I'm actually working on my second book now. So this is a trilogy, so I'm working on the second one, and the editing process has been a lot smoother this round because
Sure.
I started with a framework already in place. And so I haven't had to delete as much. There's been, things change here and there, but when I had to bring this editing mentality to my first draft of my first story, it was painful at some moments, but it was worth it though. I mean, it was definitely a better story for all the editing that I did.
I think that that is really, really cool. So when you were going through, like you said, those painful parts,
Right.
and I've been there, so I get it. I
Yeah.
totally understand. What what helped you to keep moving forward?
I'm a pretty stubborn person, so I'm not
I
gonna
love
lie,
when
that
that
was
works for you.
that was definitely part of it. But also, I think it was just believing in the story that I was telling. So for me, it's not just, I'm not just writing because it's fun. It is fun, you know. But I think what helped me get through those painful moments was because I wanted to tell a story that really touched, to notes of the gospel. And I think that's really what our world needs to hear. It's not about trying to work our way to God, but how he has worked his way to us through Christ. And so I think that's really what kept me going. Like I had to tell this story in a way that would hopefully, help people to encounter God in a new way. Because I think we live in a very closed world that only sees and engages with the things that are right in front of us, and that can become very consumeristic very easily. But like Jeremiah learns through this story that our world is actually haunted by the divine. He's constantly calling out to us, and he's not far from any one of us. And so I wanted people to see that and to encounter that through his story.
I love that you did that. And the fact that you're so what I'm hearing as you've been
Hmm.
just as you've been talking, and what I had read before we started was, okay, so we have action adventure. So we have
Hmm.
action. There's some
Yeah.
elements of sci-fi. So the fantasy elements that are coming in
Hmm.
because of world building, but yet it's there's hope, there's optimism, but then there's biblical influence as well.
Yeah.
So there are multiple pieces coming into play. How did you keep all of those that are in some ways different, but really coming together through you as only you could tell them? How did you
Hmm.
keep that? How did you blend all of that together? Because I think that's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah. For me, so what was really helpful, like I said, with the story grid is just focusing on the genre. Like sci-fi is basically action. It's a basically action genre. Um, so I just made sure I had the elements that an action story has in it. And then I could easily weave in. So that was the kind of the bare bones of the story. I could easily weave in some of the more world building elements, some of those, some of the, I guess, the truths that I wanted my characters to struggle with. I could weave those in through the action that they're doing. So it's not just people talking, or
Right.
people thinking in their heads. Like,
Yeah.
our characters need to be doing things, and so the things that they're doing are things that people do in action stories, or things that people do in like the hero's journey.
Mhm.
So, but they're doing things and encountering truths that I wanted to get across to readers.
So
If that makes sense.
that absolutely does,
Yeah.
because what I'm also envisioning is if you wanted to plan this a little bit, there's an
Mhm.
element that would say, okay, here's the scene, here's what this, the premise of what this is, if it's a discovery scene, if it's a fight scene, if it's
Mhm.
this person meets this person, how do they meet? But then there could have also had another element or column, if you will, that might say, and we're hinting around, or we're going to start to weave in this piece from the gospel, or this piece from
Mhm.
this story that I want to kind of get through this
Yeah.
particular part of this story that Christ might have told to his
Mhm.
to that's in the Bible, because that's how he taught. He taught through
Right.
storytelling.
For
So
sure.
you're
Yeah.
modeling that.
Yeah, for sure. And every story has a kind of like a main idea, a main kind of controlling idea. And so I try when I made my new draft, for my second book, I had that controlling idea better in mind. And so I kind of just let that idea guide my scene by scene work. And
Cool.
and so that the characters eventually get to the end point, that I had in mind. They might do different things than I thought they would, but they eventually kind of encounter that main idea that I put in from the beginning.
That's awesome. I think that is so cool. So how did Jeremiah get his name?
Um, no story there really.
What?
I kind of just made it up. I
That is
was
awesome.
I was thinking kind of like the prophet Jeremiah and how he kind of struggled a lot with his identity. So I think there's some of that influence. But I mean, especially his last name, Bradford, I kind of just like, oh, whatever. I think I'll just make it this.
No, but that's cool, because sometimes there is a story behind it, or that name
Hmm.
stays, and then sometimes the character comes along and then you realize that name doesn't fit this character very well. I need to
Right.
change the name, or ask the character like, hey, what do you want is this really your name? And they might look at you like, really? No.
Right. Yeah.
So I like his name and wondered if, how he came about. I thought that was
Yeah.
cool.
The more that I wrote, the more I felt like it was a good name. But
You do realize,
yeah.
Jacob, we haven't told anybody the name of your book. Tell us.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's called The Bright Abyss.
How did you come
Yep.
up with the title?
That was kind of a harder process. I wrote the whole book. I had it ready to publish, and I was like, what am I going to call this thing? Because there's like so much, like you said, there's so many facets to what it is. And I work with a lot of themes of like light and dark in the story, so I wanted to bring those ideas into the title. And there is this. Are you familiar with John Mark McMillan? He's
Mhm.
a artist. He
Mhm.
has this song called Bright Abyss, which I really liked the way that he phrased that, and I thought I would be a great book title. So I mean, thanks. It was a song title, so I didn't steal another book title technically. So, but I feel like it really fit with what I was trying to say with my story. And um and then I kind of weave those ideas even more after titling the story through the book in the
Okay,
final
so
draft.
after the title was developed, then you did go back through and make sure there was alignment or a comment, like almost kind of like sewing a needle and a thread, and you're
Yeah.
sewing and you're pulling it back, going, did I tie it back to this? Am I tying
Hmm.
it back to this? So yeah, I totally get that. And if anyone is just listening on the podcast, apparently I have to talk with my hands on this episode. So there's, the YouTube channel will have the visuals that apparently I'm
Right.
doing as I'm listening and engaging in this. So
maybe that was my fault, because I think I started doing that, and then
I do it all the time.
okay.
So do you have a favorite genre you like to read or write? I mean, I know the action, but
Yeah.
is there more?
So this is my first novel. So I wrote a nonfiction kind of ebook that was just about kind of like the philosophy of beauty and that kind of stuff. But I haven't written anything else yet. But I do enjoy action genre. So that's my only novel. I I enjoy sci-fi, like usually watching as opposed to reading, which is, I guess, maybe just how I grew up watching it and stuff.
Oh, good.
Reading, I like reading the classics, um, like John Steinbeck. He's one of my favorites. And just kind of more books in that route. Like I just finished Pride and Prejudice. That was good. That was really good. That's like the epitome of love story.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read a lot of nonfiction as well, like James K. Smith. I've been reading some of his stuff. He talks a lot about like beauty and imagination and how those things are form us, and that we are formed by just the different liturgies around us. So yeah, I've been reading that as well, getting through his books.
Cool. So I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when I talk with writers, and even in some of the interviews, we've talked a little bit about like that. I call it the inner editor, or that inner critic,
Mm-hmm.
that voice inside that's sitting there going, "Are you kidding? What are you doing? This is not a good idea."
Right.
Or worse, that it can also get to you in other ways, like saying, "Who do you think you are to write this book?
Mm-hmm.
What in the world? Are you really good enough to do this?" Type of thing.
Right.
That voice can be really loud for some people, and I wonder if you might have some suggestions for if you did have to deal with that,
Mm-hmm.
how did you overcome it? And even if you didn't face that, what would you advise?
Yeah, I've definitely had doubts for sure about the story. Like, I think there's a difference between the editor side and that doubting side, because the editor is helpful for your story. He is the one who helps make what you've created beautiful, like more beautiful and more coherent. But there is a dark side to, I guess maybe it is the editor mind, but just thinking like this story sucks, or I'm not like enjoying having to keep working on this and grinding at this.
Yeah.
I think Sean Coyne talks a lot about resistance and how we have to all face that, and it's like this thing that's trying to keep us from creating. And I think all of us have to face that in some way. And I mean, for me, like I said, it was, like I said earlier, it was really going back to the reason why I was writing.
Yeah.
It's not just for me, it's not just for fun. I think there's an important thing about writing stories, because they help to transform us and to make us better, and to help us to deal with those things that are ugly and gross in this world in a way that's redemptive. And so that's why I wanted to keep writing.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, to that voice, I was like, well, I'm just going to keep doing it.
Good.
Sometimes you just have to keep doing it, even though you have those doubts.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
I
as
mean,
you
now,
as you continue, like it becomes better.
absolutely. Absolutely. And when I use that phrase inner editor, I'm not talking about the person that you're hiring to help
Right.
you to truly be an editor. I'm talking about
Right.
that little voice inside that's sitting there going, "Are you kidding?"
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, you handled that well. I wanted to make sure I clarified for our
Yeah.
listeners. But yeah. So Jacob, this has been so awesome to have you on this show.
Mhm.
Would you please tell people how that they can connect with you further and where that they can get The Bright Abyss?
Yeah. So the book is on Amazon for sale. You can check out more stuff at my website, which is jacobehess.com. And if you sign up for my email list, you can also get a free copy of the other book I mentioned, the one about the philosophy of beauty, for free. So yeah, you can sign up there. And yeah, I got another book coming out, and actually an audiobook of The Bright Abyss will be coming out hopefully sometime this year as well.
Oh, how exciting. Are you
Yeah.
going to be are you going to be narrating?
No, I have a narrator who's working on it right now, and he can
Awesome.
do a lot better job than I can. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
That is awesome.
it's been
Jacob,
fun, like hearing him bring the characters to life with his different voices and stuff. I think he even threw a Scottish accent in there.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so Scott's in space, I guess.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. Thank you so much for being on
Yeah,
the show, Jacob. This has been so much fun.
yeah, it's been fun.